Thank you so much for sitting down with me. I want to start with this. How would you view being a U.S. Senator as a Libertarian?
As a Libertarian, my job in the U.S. Senate would really to return us to constitutional values. The very first thing that I would do is look at what laws have been passed that are unconstitutional and work towards repealing those. We must go back to the master contract that governs this country, and that's the Constitution.
How do you envision doing that as presumably one Libertarian among 99 other Republicans and Democrats for the most part?
It's funny because I also see my role there as a referee, to be somebody that can cross the line and say, let's work together. Because when the Republicans work with the Democrats, it's usually for something that's going to collude against the American public, increase taxes, get those Christmas tree bills that are so famous passed. But my job as a Libertarian would bring people to the point of consensus on freedom. And I'm going to need the support of the American people to do this, because certainly the senators that are already there are used to receiving, corporate donations. The lobbyists give them all kind of money. It's a lot to ask them to give up in favor of freedom instead for the American people.
To that end, Libertarian candidates traditionally get around 5–6% of the vote here in Indiana, at least. That's roughly what you got last time, 5.5%. Is short of winning, which is obviously always the goal. Is something like that a win? Or how do you define victory short of an actual win?
That's a great question. Short of an actual win, I would define victory as first covering the spread. In order to move the liberty needle and to encourage the old parties to move us towards freedom, the second loser has to know that they lost because of me. They have to know that they lost because libertarian ideals and freedom are being demanded by the populace. So when someone like me comes out and said, I absolutely demand all of your freedoms all of the time in cases of cannabis, even medicinal, recreational, commercial, industrial, hemp use, all of that must be free and open to the people. But when you have the old parties saying, well, we're going to study it for a while. In the case of Senator Donnelly, it's been studied ad infinitum. Our veterans who are suffering from PTSD need that medicine right now. So what will happen is if Senator Donnelly loses, and he loses the votes from the veterans who have PTSD and their supporters, he'll know that he lost because he missed the point. He missed that the American people are demanding their freedom. So next time, they'll be a little bit smarter. They'll allow people more freedom, and that's the needle that I'm trying to move.
Yeah, so essentially in that way, you're almost playing the role of the spoiler to help advance those ideas.
It's not a spoiler, it's a freedom. I demand all of your freedoms all of the time. And maybe that does spoil the political system for those who are in power, because their entire modus operandi is to say, how can I get control of the tax dollars that flow? When you go to work every day, 40% of your labor is taken by the government and then redirected into purposes for which they benefit, not you. We need to switch that around.
There's been a lot of discussion in this campaign about sort of how you represent Hoosiers when it comes to working with President Trump and the current leadership in Washington. Joe Donnelly talking about how he votes with the president when he thinks he's right or good for Hoosiers, and Mike Braun going a lot farther than that, saying he's the one for the Trump agenda almost entirely. How would you view your role as it comes to working with President Trump in D.C.?
My role my role would then be to hold him back from doing the things that are unconstitutional. My role is to hold people to the Constitution. That's the master contract. I think what we saw in the debate on October 8th was Senator Donnelly trying to prove how Republican he is, and of course Senator Braun with the ACA trying to prove how Democrat he is. What they're proving is that they are more of the same. You can vote for Braunelly if you want, but the fact of the matter is that the only way that you get freedom is to demand it. And as a voter, the way that you show that demand is by voting instead for freedom and voting for Lucy Brenton.
Also the issues of tariffs and outsourcing in this campaign. How do you define success when it comes to this sort of the tariffs that have been in play over the last year and a half?
Short of actually having a Senate seat, there's very little that I can do to affect it. So I would say that my role is to look at what's constitutional and what's not. That's the first lens that we have to look through. And the second thing is to say, what political ploy is being made here? How are these subsidies that are given to replace the money lost by tariffs affecting the average individual? The average Hoosier is paying multiple times for that tariff, first in the price of corn, then in the price of the subsidies to the farmers. So it's absolutely unacceptable that we're being stolen from at every level. I put out, and this is kind of controversial, I hope you can get this in its entirety. I believe in zero corporate income taxes. The reason our jobs are being outsourced is so that we can keep prices low by not having as many corporate taxes included in the price. Every time you buy something, cost of taxes, inputs, they're all part of the cost of production and the end price that a consumer pays. Having corporate taxes of zero would allow our corporations to stay in this country, keep prices low. If we made corporate tax in Indiana zero tomorrow, companies would fight to come here, jobs would flood Indiana.
How do you replace the money that would be lost by zeroing out those taxes?
The money isn't lost anywhere. The money is simply in the consumer's hands instead of the government's. So if I pay $10 for a product instead of $15 because of the taxes, now the consumer pays $10 and the other $5 stays in the consumer's pocket where it belongs.
There's also the issue of health care, and you've talked about sort of Braun and Donnelly trying to almost take the same sort of position when it comes to government's role in health care a little bit. Is there any role for government in health care in your mind?
There is no role in government for health care in my mind. And by elaborating, let me say this. When government enters a market, it disrupts it. It's an unseen hand that moves prices up. When you take people out of the position of actually paying for their own health care, they don't know how much it costs. I'll use myself as an example. When I worked for the phone company, I had amazing insurance. I had a birth, baby number 7, that was over $15,000. And I literally did not have even an aspirin. There was no OBGYN there. It was a midwife-assisted birth. But yet with my baby number 9, born at home, that baby was $4,000. That's it. It's an $11,000 cost differential because there's no competition and you are insulated from the cost by the insurance companies. Do you want to know why your premiums are so high? That's it. It's that $1,000 aspirin.
If you remove government entirely from healthcare, though, doesn't that put everything in the hands of the insurance companies? And is that what people want?
No, it puts it back in the hands of the consumer and the provider where it should be.
The tax reform bill. Something that Mike Braun obviously supports, something that Joe Donnelly says was bad for this country in the long term. If you had been in the U.S. Senate when the tax reform bill came up, how would you have voted?
I will vote for anything that increases freedom and reduces costs. So I would have voted for it, but I don't think it went far enough. When I reviewed it, it looked like Trump took 35 to 21%, from 35 to 21% on the corporate income tax. That's great. That means that consumers are going to pay less, but it's not nearly good enough. So I will work towards freedom every step of the way, drag them kicking and screaming to give you your freedoms back, and anything that moves the needle towards freedom is something I would vote for. And
then lastly, obviously, we're in a roughly two-party system despite your presence on the ballot. People are sort of, I think, just used to going and either voting for a Democrat or a Republican. How do you convince Hoosiers that shouldn't, let me put it this way. How do you convince Hoosiers that a vote for you isn't throwing away their vote the way some people have called voting for a third-party candidate?
If you've been manipulated by the duopoly to only believe that there's duopoly, then voting for one or the other plays right into their hands. They continually put up candidates who are willing to vote for the largest tax increase in Hoosier history, as in the case of Braun. And of course, Donnelly votes for tax increases all the time. So the only way that you can get what you want is to actually vote for what you want. And so you've got to show the two-party system that you are in control of your vote. The only way to stick it to the man who's controlling you is to vote for the alternative, which is Lucy Brenton.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Thank you.